Book Talks with Colors of Influence. I am your host, Maylene Hamto. I am an avid reader and reviewer of books for my book blog, Colors of Influence, and I also review books for outlets and platforms such as City Books, Hollow Hollow Review, Book Sirens, Readsy, and the Nonfiction Authors Association. And this particular session or this particular episode is special because we have a panel. So we'll introduce the panelists later, but I just wanted to acknowledge we have Nathan Go, Eileen Tabios, and Jason Tanamor joining us today. So very quickly about Book Talks. Book Talks focuses on fiction and nonfiction works that highlight issues of diverse identities, equity and inclusion, social justice, indigenous ways of being, and decolonial approaches to the struggle for liberation. So I talk to authors whose works contribute to a nuanced understanding of various cross-cultural contexts of our shared humanity and common dreams. And I am so honored to welcome again Nathan Go, Eileen Tabios, and Jason Tanamor to be part of the panel conversation today. This is really an exciting discussion among Filipino-American writers who have written novels that fictionalized and reimagined life in the homeland for our kababayan during the 20-year rule of Ferdinand Marcos. Those decades were marked with much controversy, much turmoil, violence, including the infamous period when martial law was declared in 1972, and it lasted effectively until Marcos was ousted in 1986. So, in their novels, Nathan, Eileen, and Jason focus on people living their lives, finding a sense of meaning and purpose amid the socio-political chaos that drove many Filipinos to abject poverty. And each of the novels, The Balikbayan Artist by Eileen, Forgiving Imelda Marcos by Nathan, and Love in the Pearl of the Orient by Jason, offer a window into how ordinary people resisted hopelessness, despair, and agony during a turbulent time. So I just want to acknowledge that the idea for this panel was surfaced by Eileen, as we were talking about her latest novel, The Balikbayan Artist. And you can, click on the YouTube playlist for the Colors of Influence blog to dive more into that interview. But briefly, I would like to share bios for each of the panelists. So Nathan was a 2018 David T.K. Wong Fellow at the University of East Anglia. He's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and the Zell Writers Program. He was a 2012 PEN America Emerging Voices Fellow. So his fiction has appeared in Plowshares, American Short Fiction, the Bear Life Review, and the Des Moines Register. He's a senior lecturer at the University of the Philippines, Mindanao. And Eileen has released more than 70 collections of poetry, fiction, essays, and experimental biographies from publishers in 11 countries and in cyberspace. So, in addition to The Balikbayan Artist, she has also written the long form novel Dove Lion, a fairy tale for our times. She is also credited with inventing the poetic form hainaku, an innovative and playful spin on the Japanese haiku. And Jason is named as one of the 5 best modern Filipino writers by Pinas Global newspaper and listed as one of Positively Filipinos Phil-Ams among the remarkable and famous. So Jason is the acclaimed author of the Filipino-themed novels Vampires of Portlandia, Love, Dance, and Egg Rolls, and The Legend of Sensei Sinelas. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, just to get us all started, maybe Nathan can get us, headed off. But can you quickly share a brief synopsis of your novel, Forgiving Imelda Marcos?
Well, my novel is an imagination. It asks the question, what if, particularly, what if during the last years of Corazon Aquino's life, she contemplates um, getting closure from the her historical nemesis, Imelda Marcos, So she's sick at this point and dying from cancer. And being a devout Catholic, she thinks about the question of the meaning of life and what does forgiveness mean. So together with her driver, she goes to see Imelda Marcos.
Thank you, Nathan. Eileen, can you share a little bit about Balikbayan Artist?
So the my novel is about this artist who was a member of the Manong generation, and the Manongs were mostly men who immigrated to the United States during the 1920s and 1930s to work the agricultural fields of California and Hawaii, as well as the fishing industry in Alaska. And among them was a certain artist who is considered the leading artist of the Manong generation. And I fictionalize how this fellow, returned to the Philippines, hence he was a Balikbayan. And he returned to a country that was in the middle of political turmoil and with a dictatorship soon to occur. And how those events changed his way of life and way of art making as a permanent, in this case, permanent Balikbayan.
Jason, tell us about your novel.
Sure. Love in the Pearly Orient is basically about a guy named Roberto who is going to college and kind of spent his whole life trying to get to college. And then his father passes away. So he's forced to go back home to try to sustain the family rice farm, but it goes bankrupt during the Green Revolution when Marcos had the hybrid seed. And he tries to go back to college, but realizes that the political backdrop when Marcos takes office is much more complex for him. And so he's got really no options to get back to school. He's kind of bitter about things and joins a protest group when they want to send soldiers to Vietnam. And it ends up being violent instead of a peaceful protest. And so he kind of just immerses himself in this protest group, protesting issues that are important to him. And during this time, he meets a fellow student who is going, she's a wealthy heiress, and they fall in love only to realize that their lives are completely different. And he suspects that her family might be part of the problem, part of Marcos's cronies. And so they kind of put their differences aside for the betterment of their own future. And as martial art takes effect, it kind of culminates in a grand escape to America.
Thank you all so much for sharing that. And for the next question, we'll start with Eileen, and then Eileen, and then Nathan, and then Jason again. But can you tell us the story behind your choice of protagonist? Why did you choose, this character? And another thing that I'd like to add to that, if you can also, share about who was the audience that you thought about when you were writing this novel.
That follow-up question is actually a good one for me, because I rarely consider audience when I'm in the middle of creating my works. I'm just trying to create a work of writing as well as I can make it to be, because it's my hope that good writing, fine literature, ultimately will bring in an audience, including folks that I wouldn't have anticipated had I been targeting them specifically. So the Balikbayan Artist, though, is unique for me in that I did have a particular audience in mind. And that relates to the inspiration for my protagonist. The novel's protagonist is inspired by a real-life artist, Venancio C. Igarta, who was also a Manong and who also left California's agricultural fields to become an artist in New York and had various successes. He was the first Filipino artist exhibited at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The cover of my book is actually reproduction of a drawing of his that is in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian. So he had his own artistic achievements, but he became unknown, fell into obscurity. So my audience was the younger generation of Filipino-Americans, as well as general art lovers. I wanted to raise attention to this artist's existence. I didn't have the resources and mindset to do an actual biography of him. So I decided to, because I was very interested in writing fiction. And so I decided to write a novel based on him, his life. And the book is inspired by and dedicated to Venancio C. Igarda. But in creating a work of fiction, I decided to make him a Balikbayan, to do something that I know Mr. Igarda never had a chance to do, which is to return to the Philippines. And as I followed that train of thought, I thought, well, okay, so we're fictionalizing this artist's return to the Philippines. What is the Philippines? And in that case, I made it a country beset in political turmoil. And I made this returning artist land in the Philippines, look around, realize that there's political turmoil, and that he ends up becoming an underground member of the rebellion. And also, of course, all that was happening was affected how he was making his art, because he was originally a color abstractionist. And in the Philippines, he became a figurative artist. He started making more realistic scenes because that enabled him, he felt, to more adequately reflect the political turmoil of his times. So that's the Balikbayan Artist.
Nathan, can you share with us your, the story behind your choice of protagonist, and who was your primary audience writing?
So I've always been fascinated with this two characters who are also real life people. Corazon Aquino, the former president of the Philippines, and Imelda Marcos, the former first lady, because the two of them who are pitted against each other in history as sort of like arch enemies, they are very opposite figures. One is kind of quiet, so-called housewife, self-declared, and the other, Imelda Marcos, of course, is this very flamboyant, bigger than life character, sings and dances, and is very fond of like drama. And so, how did these two characters meet each other in life in a certain way, psychologically? Everything is it's so interesting to me. But as I wrote this novel, these two characters actually became less and less interesting to me. The more I researched about them, the more I'm actually drawn to another character that kind of came out as out of my imagination, which is the driver of Corazon Aquino, Lito. Because Lito is kind of this common man who finds himself kind of like trapped in a situation, being asked by Corazon, his employer, to drive her to see Imelda Marcos. And so he's also facing this dilemma, although he's kind of powerless what to do about it. Or is he really powerless? Is it correct what Corazon Aquino is doing, trying to see Imelda Marcos, presumably to forgive her because of her religious convictions? And so this not only the characters but the dilemma that they find themselves in was very interesting to me, and that's really what propelled the novel.
Jason.
So this this story actually is loosely based off my parents' life. My dad, so I kind of want to tell from my dad's point of view because he was part of the opposition, and I never really understood because I was born and raised in the States, and so they never really talked about it. But whenever my American friends would come over, um, my parents would tell them this just fascinated abridged story from beginning to end, leaving a lot of details out. And I just always thought it was a fascinating story to hear over and over again. And when I finally got the courage to start wanting to write about it and asking them questions, they really started to kind of shut down a little bit. They clammed up. So it took years, and it's still to this day that they don't really talk about it. And it took my dad a long time to go back to the Philippines, even though we have family there. And so I wanted to just kind of immortalize it, almost document the experience as I was trying to finagle some details out of them over the course of years. But a lot of it I just kind of made up, mostly probably made up, based on what I thought probably happened. But the main audience was really me. It was just me trying to understand and wanting to get to know my parents on a level that um, was different how I grew up, because I'm one of those kids that was kind of born in the mid 70s and suffered from cultural identity. And I was basically a Midwestern kid from Iowa, and I just happened to have brown skin, but I was an American kid. So it took me a long time to finally accept it, and I think that really propelled my interest in the Philippines and their life. And so I kind of wanted to write the story for myself, but mostly people like me that I started to meet when I started writing Filipino stories, and I was attending the Filipino Book Festival in San Francisco and some other things where I was meeting other people. I was like, wow, there's a lot of people like me. And it wasn't just because there's a very small Filipino community in my hometown, but they're friends of my parents, and the kids are kind of similar to me, born and raised in the States. But all we really shared were tinikling dancing and coconut dances. And that was like the most Filipino thing I did. And then most of all, I just was an American kid with brown skin. So.
Yeah, thanks for writing these novels. It really kind of gives, voice to, a lot of the pain, a lot of the things that people have forgotten or maybe have chosen to forget about that period. And I also want to note that, from what you have shared so far, there are similar threads to the stories of our kababayans in the homeland, in the diaspora, like you mentioned, Jason, the disconnection from culture, right? Um, and during martial law specifically, there were countless stories of loss, of exile, of violence. And I can, share from my perspective before I ask this question, just a little bit of background. I was born during martial law in Manila, Philippines. So born in Tondo, grew up in Sampaloc. So I grew up in poverty, and it was very hard for my parents to make a living during that time. There was a lot of fear and uncertainty among the adults in my life that I picked up on even as a child. Um, I was 10 years old in fourth grade, attending Dr. Alejandro Albert Elementary School when the EDSA revolution happened. And we stopped going to school for like months. And then when we came back, we were kind of sitting, in our wooden desks looking at like the draft of the revised constitution. I mean, because that was going to be what's going to be ratified, right, for this new country. Anyway, I just wanted to share that because this question is like I wanted to ask, what was it like for you, as a writer, as a Filipino writer that, had to immerse in tales of, injustice, hardship, and other, stories during that era. So with that, maybe we can start with Eileen again and then punt it over to Jason and then Nathan.
I I came to creative writing later than many writers, in the sense that I started writing in my mid 30s, and as a writer, both as a poet and in other forms, I've become very relatively rabid in talking about the effects of martial law. And I think it's partly because, and many people don't know this about me, in the early 80s, I was a fresh graduate in New York City, and I had a chance to meet some of the um, members of the opposition to Marcos who had gone into exile on the East Coast. And I was a political science major as an undergraduate, and I had done some research on Philippine politics, which I had used as an introduction to meet some of them. And I was a journalist back then. And I've always wanted to write about their stories and about their sufferings, but I never had the chance to do that, nor did I have the right venue to get such writings published. And so I felt like when I finally became a writer in my mid 30s, I focus a lot on what's on that period of Philippine history because I couldn't do it 20 years earlier. And I think I feel a sense of guilt about that, the fact that I was so ineffective as a younger writer, talking about these moments related to martial law and its effect. I mean, I can easily intellectualize the effects of martial law, um, and I've done so in poli-sci papers, but I've never gotten to write much more emotionally about the impact on people. And the problem with someone like me doing that today is that I have to use fiction because I wasn't there, you know? So I'm kind of like juggling ways of managing to address this material. And at the moment, fiction is the only way I've figured out how to do it. Well, poetry, but, you know, creative writing versus a more, you know, nonfiction approach.
You're on mute.
Mylene, you're muted.
Thank you. If I could turn it over to you, Jason. So, yeah,
Sure. Yeah, it was, I mean, similar to Eileen, I kind of had to do my own research and like Nathan said last week, just had to do my own research because I wasn't there. And I got, you know, the problem with reading history obviously is because it's told from a very slanted view, mostly by people who won the you know the violence or whatever, and the conflict. And so, and I get it from the American media, but I can only imagine what it's like because we're seeing a lot of it, what's happening here. And in 2016, 2017, 2018, I was living in Portland, Oregon when um, Trump was in office the first time. And when George Floyd happened, I think that was in 2020, um, the protests were rampant around the country and especially in Portland. And I remember feeling just at times helpless, at times hopeless, you know, at times fearful. But then at the same time, I was going to work every day like everyone else. I was, you know, trying to avoid getting COVID. So you kind of read these news stories and it's very sensationalized in a very short period of time, but really life is happening, you know, just like fiction, life is happening, but there's still got to be dramatic overtures to keep people interested. So I kind of look at it the way it happened here. It was kind of probably similar. It's just a wave of emotions, and one day you can wake up feeling perfectly fine. You can try to avoid what's happening. You know, you, like even now, I try to limit my social media intake and try to limit the news. At this very moment. In 4 or 5 years, it could be totally different again. But that stuff is still happening. So it's still in the back of my head, but I try to not be fair. So I feel like it's just a roller coaster of emotions going through it would be similar to what my parents went through. And I completely understand why they didn't want to talk about it. It's just like, I don't want to talk about what's happening now. It's very traumatic. It's probably PTSD at some point, but I'm glad that they have decided to at least tell some of the story that I could try to fill in the blanks.
thank you. And Nathan, you have a very interesting perspective living in the homeland now. So, go ahead. Uh,
So I was born in the early 80s, so I don't get to live it personally, the martial law years, thankfully. Um, I do remember it to be a very turbulent time when I was growing up, watching this kind of like low resolution TV, a lot of like assassination attempts on Coraz Aquino's life, Marcos getting overthrown. I do remember bits and pieces of those. but not so much the martial lawyers. I know through research, it was a very horrific time. Lots of human rights abuses. Um, and so when I was writing this book, I do have that in mind, but at the same time, I since I don't have personal firsthand experience of that, I don't feel like I wanted to concentrate on that because I don't think I would do a good job. Many better writers have done that, and artists have done that job. But it also doesn't mean that we should forget it, obviously, right? Like, I mean, because I'm not just saying this because obviously people are forgetting quite easily nowadays, but because we are still actually feeling the effects of it, and maybe a lot less and less people, fewer and fewer people are acknowledging it. But even as simple as like economically, the Philippines went so backwards during those years. We actually started quite uh, uh, good economically back in the 60s, maybe 70s. And then because of the martial law years and the presidency of the first Marcos era, it just went downhill. And that actually affected me in the ways it affected a lot of Filipinos who went abroad. You know, we thought that um, Philippines was hopeless, so much corruption, so much poverty. Um, you go abroad to find a better life. And so I was one of those. I left the Philippines in 2001, right after September 11, actually. And I spent a big part of my adulthood in the US for 16 years. And 5 years ago, I came back to the Philippines. And so it's very weird. It's very strange coming back to this time. I didn't plan this novel. I didn't write the novel when I came back, but I wrote it so long ago, so that when the second Marcos presidency um, occurred, I couldn't have predicted it. It was strange that suddenly the thing that I wrote, this novel, became kind of a little bit relevant to the times.
Thank you for sharing, Nathan. And so the next question is about elements of Filipino culture that are incorporated into your work. And I just want to share that, when I talked to Eileen a couple of months ago about character the main character in Balikbayan Artist, the concept of kapwa came up as an important theme. And of course, Eileen has collaborated with Dr. Lenny Strobel, who is who has done extensive research on kapwa values and how that is incorporated into Filipino consciousness and the diaspora, etc. And so the question is, what aspects of the Filipino psyche or Filipino culture are highlighted in your book, and why did you choose to focus on these characteristics? And with this question, we'll start with Jason and then turn it over to Nathan and then Eileen. Okay.
So mine is, I think mine's very colorful. The culture, with the jeepneys, some are very bedazzled. The food, some of the physical traits of Filipinos, like the nose, and but one of the things I made as a character was the weather, the temperature, some of the natural disasters, and it almost kind of plays a role of shifting the narrative. Like he could finally be having a good day, and then a mudslide happens and takes out, half a village or something. So I really wanted to try to nuance, some of the Filipino culture without making it stereotypical. So, every now and again, they'd get into a jeepney and just kind of describe that a little bit. So it was a good learning experience for me because, I've never seen one in real life. You don't see them in the States here. And, they have rickshaws in Portland, the food delivery. So I kind of see some of those tricycle things happening, but you don't really see that. But in Portland, especially, there's a lot of authentic Filipino restaurants. Not so much. We're in my hometown in Illinois right now, so
Yeah, and Nathan, the premise of your book about forgiveness, right? And as you mentioned, the, Cory Aquino, very religious, devout Catholic woman, and just that's part of Filipino culture. It's just kind of live and let live, forgive. And so anyway, I'll just stop there and let you share about aspects of Filipino culture.
Aspects of Filipino culture as it relates to the novel. I think you touched on the forgiveness. We are supposedly known for being a very forgiving culture. Although in my mind, I'm thinking that maybe it's not just the Filipinos, right? Like what's happening around the world. I don't know why it is, or is that the right um for me, is that the right question? Like, are we a very forgiving people, or is there something else going on? Um, Other aspects of Filipino culture, Filipinos are very loving people, very family oriented, um, and very religious. And so we are. So as far as I know, so is that is that a good trait or not a good trait? Like this being religious or being very forgiving. And so that's actually kind of like tackled in the book as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Eileen.
I would echo what Jason and Nathan had said, but I'll focus on the difference, if not tension, between city and country, because whenever I was doing my own Balikbayan tourist visits many years ago, I'd go through Manila before going to the provinces of the Ilocos, where I'm from. And as a young child, I was born in the Philippines. I grew up between two points. One was Baguio City, and the other was, again, the Ilocos. So in my book, I focused a lot on the beauty of the provinces where there is still more nature than exists in the cities. And I believe the last time I returned to the Philippines and I visited Baguio City and visited the hillside where my childhood home was, it used to be one of three houses on that hillside. When I visited it, I looked up at the hill, at the mountain, and it was crammed, one house after another. It seemed like not a single inch existed in between those houses, all across the hillside. So there's overdevelopment and there's overpopulation as people move, I guess, from the rural areas to the cities. So in my novel, I focused a lot on how beautiful the province's rural landscape was. I probably romanticized the idea of, the rice fields under this beautiful sunset and all that. And I didn't mind. I wanted to have that childhood memory immortalized on the page, you know. And it is true that we certainly could have done a better job developing our cities, right, in the Philippines, in some cases. So yeah, I focus on the province's rural landscape beauty. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. So, with this next question, I'll first preface it by stating that I acknowledge my vantage point, maybe my privilege, even, right? Being in the diaspora. So, I've been living here in the States, in Turtle Island, for more than 30 years. And so while I've been keeping up with Philippine politics, I do so from this continent, from far away, far removed from the everyday realities, the chismes, the political intrigues of the homeland, right? Pero I just still want to share that, at least for me, for my family members and my friends who have left the homeland to work, live in other places, it is shocking to hear that to know that there's a trend toward a revisionist version of the Marcos legacy, right? As you mentioned, Nathan, and as we all know, there's a second Marcos presidency, um, and so this revisionist history, of the martial law era, does really not quite align with how many people experienced life in the Philippines during that time. And so what was really great about the approach you each of you have taken with your novels is that you use that time period as a backdrop and then effectively share the impacts of, what was going on, in the dictatorship on the everyday people, even without an explicit call out, right? How do you think this book counters the tendency of Filipinos for collective amnesia and the propensity to move on quickly from difficult experiences? I think, Nathan, you mentioned earlier, it's important to remember. So, why is it important to remember? And with that question, can I start with you, Nathan? Okay.
Mm, well, I mean, um, for me, I think what's happening for me at least is that I think people are willingly forgetting, maybe not by accident, because it's convenient in a way. And what I'm seeing happening is that it's convenient in the way that it affirms certain parts of their identity. So when we talk about Filipino culture, a while ago, I forgot to mention the regionalism that is we have in this Philippines. Maybe because the Philippines is very it's an archipelago, and we have a lot of islands, as you guys know, and we actually have found a lot of different kind of communities depending on where you live. And so these communities actually have their own identities. Like I live in the south of the Philippines, and so we have our own identity, and the north has their own identity, and so for the west and the east and everywhere. And because the Manila or the Luzon areas are much, much more represented in the Philippines than the provinces, as Eileen was talking a while ago. Sometimes the people here, I feel, they feel underrepresented. They don't get to see themselves so much on the TV. Even the national language is based off the northern dialect. And so when a lot of the politics that's happening is actually tied to their identity of where they are from and where the politician is from. So, for example, Marcos is from the north, and so the northern people, I don't know if they do kind of quote unquote love him. I mean, they would say, "I love Marcos" or whatever. But I think that it's because that they see themselves in Marcos. They see that it's one of them. And so, if you attack Marcos, you're attacking them. How dare you attack us? And so it becomes this kind of very strangely linked identity and politics and history. And obviously, you don't want to paint yourself in a bad light. Nobody wants to do that. So I'm seeing a little bit of that. And so, for example, Duterte is another big character in recent years. And so people in the South also don't want to, they would selectively remember parts of Duterte's presidency in a way that affirms their identity. And so it's a very complicated question. It's not just that we're forgiving or we're forgetting. It's because we're kind of like trying to figure out who we are and what we want to present ourselves to other people. I guess that aspect is what I'm seeing a lot of living here in the Philippines. But I'm interested to hear what Jason and Eileen's perspectives are here.
Yeah, Eileen, did you want to?
Yes, on the points that Nathan was saying, there is a section in the Balikbayan Artist that clearly is fiction, in that I have the protagonist talking to a younger rebel, and the rebel is expressing some concern about some killings happening further south in the archipelago in Negros. And I have the artist looking at this younger rebel and saying, "Oh, that's interesting that you and the community here in the Ilocos, where I'd set the novel, are concerned about the killings happening way, way down south, And I have the younger rebel look at the artist and say, well, isn't that how we are all supposed to respond? I mean, isn't that how the population of an archipelago create a single country from these far-flung outposts? I mean, it's clearly fiction because that is not the way the culture works. But, I note that in the Balikbayan Artist, as well as my first novel, Dove Lion, they have a happy ending where the people overthrow the dictatorships. So I guess as a fictionist, I very much insist on being idealistic. I'm making it up anyway. So I'm going to be idealistic and say the good guys win or good things happen. And the reason I do that is I think that by writing it in those manner, you at least psychologically help to normalize the possibility that the good guys can win and a good turn of events can happen. Because even if it's not true, it can affect the psyche of the reader and maybe ultimately affect real life happenings down the road. So that's my position as a novelist. You know, yeah.
You know, I think kind of what Nathan was saying, I feel like people are rooted in values, right? You know, and when you look at the right and the left in the United States, especially, the right's very rooted in pro-life and Second Amendment and all that stuff, and the left is, you know, more diverse, working class folks. So even if they skirt that line and they're sticking to that message and doing things that are completely something you know, I hope, is not moral or whatever, I feel like they're always going to go back to that rooted value, you know. And I remember watching an analyst on TV talking about the difference between Democrats and Republicans, and Republicans are very black and white, you know. It's like, and Democrats are, you know, Republicans are like, well, that guy's poor because he can't hold a job, because he's lazy, because he's dumb or whatever. And Democrats have always been like, well, he's poor because he lost his job because he was laid up. You know, there's always these different things. And no matter what other message they're delivering, they always stay rooted in that bigger picture. Because I have friends on the right that will talk about, you know, the abortion is so, you know, important to them and all these things. And all I'm thinking is like, would you ever get an abortion? And why do you care about someone else? You know, and it's always just been like almost the, you know, the narrative distance is so far versus on the left where it's, you know, you kind of experience it yourself, you know. And that's just kind of how I see how our politics have been. You know, I have friends who are really good friends in person, but then on social media they're insane. I'm like, what are you even talking about? You know, when I grew up, um, you know, I graduated from college before Facebook and Google even existed. So I wouldn't even know that you were a racist unless I went to your house and you had a flag in your garage. You know, now you can get online and you can know exactly who are the nuts in your, you know, that your friends. But it's weird because I have friends who I totally politically disagree with, but in real life they would do anything for me. And I just feel like it's just these rooted values that keep them voting the same way all the time, no matter what.
You know, you raise a very important point, Jason, about the effects of social media. Because as I understand it, back in the day, in martial law days and earlier, one of the reasons that all the horrible things can happen is that the news of their happening is limited to the locale in which the incidents are happening. Whereas today, if someone posts about it on Facebook or anywhere else, it can spread, the word can spread like lightning.
Yeah.
Of course, Filipinos are very adept with social media, one of the most adept populations around the world as regards social media.
I think that's absolutely true. The when during the martial law, the Marcos Senior really controlled the media because there were so few outlets anyway to start with, so it was very easy to take control, and that was the reason why, you know, the Catholic radios played a very important part during the EDSA revolution. But nowadays, like you guys are talking about, like TikTok and social media, there's so many outlets now. It's kind of like the very different from the past during the martial law era. But I think the second Marcos presidency, or even before that, you can really see how savvy they have become. And so I know for a fact that there is, you can search this in Google as well. Even before Marcos became president, they were already using like Cambridge Analytica and all this like companies who do social media and try to influence the population to make their names more positive, to associate themselves to be like likable people and all and so forth. And in the first year of office, Even I think her sister, Eileen Marcos, commissioned certain directors to create new films about them, and obviously, like they're branding it as something like this is the what really happened during the ouster, and so they're painting it more positively and so forth. And it actually showed in cinemas. You know, this was like mainstream media, and so it's become a lot more sinister because now you sort of cannot tell, or a lot of people cannot tell what is kind of like fact from fiction. Whereas before, you can almost assume that if the media is controlled by the president, then you just kind of like assume that
Huh.
it's very
Yeah.
skeptical. But now it's like in TikTok, and so a lot of people are just like, oh, maybe this is true. It's in TikTok,
Right.
not knowing that this person was already influenced by, you know, they were actually paid somewhere.
Right. Right.
Yeah, definitely the double-edged sword. Yeah, I've seen a lot of those posts as well, Nathan. You know, the reels about how great it was back then, you know, PICC, it really wasn't, you know, yeah, so definitely influenced the electorate if there was other things going on as well. So but yeah, thanks for that conversation. Before I ask this last question that we have planned, I also just want to share that I want to open it up, you know, after you all answer the last question for questions that you may have for each other. Okay. So just, you know, something yeah, just something to put out there. That's maybe how we'll end. But this question that I have, is there anything about bringing this book to life that you would have done differently? And Nathan, I'll start with you because I know that your book published in 2023, you mentioned was 20 years in the making, right? So you could tell us a little bit about that and then what you would have done differently. So
Sure, I would have gone with publishing the book if I had known all these things were gonna happen. Like I said, when I was writing this, I didn't know what was gonna happen, and I'm not a very political person for, and it could be a fault of mine. I just tend to be a very private person, focusing on other things. This is kind of like a fluke novel, and I don't think I would probably write another novel quite like this. And I say that because even the title, so I've been going back and forth about this, and would I have changed the title if I could do this novel again? Because some people, when I was before it even got published, and I was showing this novel, making my friends read it, even in the Philippines and the US. Um, I know that the title would cause a controversy, but that was not my point. I know a lot of people kind of accuse me of, clickbait or whatever, like putting the sensational title. But for me, uh, one way to stay sane in like writing, especially like political characters and historical characters, is kind of like not minding all the noise. Because if you mind the noise, then it's almost like it's gonna paralyze you. Like, how do you write such a novel thinking of, oh, how would the how would this, what my friends think of this, how would they think of this, how people think of this, and it would really hamper your writing. And so my ethos in writing this is just to focus on the characters, focusing on their circumstances. What would they do in the circumstances? If I put myself in Luther's shoes, if I put myself in Tarzan's shoes, that kind of writing liberates me and stops me from being paralyzed. And because of that, it felt to me like the title was inevitable from the point of view of the characters, from the point of view of Tarzan Aquino, because she really was contemplating whether to forgive Imelda Marcos or not in my book, or possibly in real life as well. Who knows? Um, and so it makes sense for this title to be that title. And I think what a lot of people misunderstood from this title is they took it as a advocacy, like forgive Imelda Marcos, like we should forgive Imelda Marcos, and that was not really the part of the book. It was what if wondering. Should this character forgive Imelda Marcos? So it was more of a question mark rather than a advocacy.
yeah, we'll turn it over to you, Eileen, and then Jason.
If there's something I could do differently about bringing the book out, well, maybe it might still happen. I hope so, but so far I'm having bad luck with it. I would love to certainly introduced the book as part of an art exhibition of some of Venancio C. Igarda's paintings. I mean, that just makes sense. The problem is that I had maybe 6 or so of his works, and they were taken out by one of California's wildfires. There was a group of works in the Philippines that was taken down by some flooding, typhoon. And there's still a core group of works in New York, but without going into details, the art estate is in a mess. But I mean, I had been hoping that, yeah, I could even launch a book amidst an exhibition of the paintings of V.C. Igarda, the leading artist of the Manong generation. So far, there's no potential for that. I'll keep trying, but that's something that I would love to change about bringing the book out.
For me, I think I wish I would have visited the Philippines to kind of get a feel of the area. But this book has changed a lot over the course of years. I mean, I originally wrote in first person, then it became third person close, then it was only one character, then it became Roberto and Selena perspectives throughout the book. Um, and a lot of the events, it's written over basically a 10-year time from 1965 to almost 1975. So at one point, I was trying to capture his entire presidency to 86, and so it changed a lot. So I'm very happy how it was. So I have started pitching it, but the biggest thing for me is I wish I actually visited the Philippines. I just don't know if that's going to happen now, just with the not even just the States, but the whole world is just kind of insane right now. I mean, it seems like every time I turn the TV on, there's another plane crash, and it's just, it's terrifying. It's just terrifying.
Actually, I had a question for Jason. You said that your new novel was inspired by your parents' story of being real life rebels. Do they know about your manuscript? Have they read it, or would you? How
They
does?
have not read it. They're not really book readers. And it's funny because they would always tell us a bridge story if I asked them to, but when I finally wanted to write it, they wouldn't. I tried interviewing my parents, and they would give me every excuse. And then there's a little piece of detail that I just learned probably about 6 months ago. My mom was in the hospital. They're both diabetics, so my mom was in the hospital and she had COVID, and her oxygen level was down. So I went to go visit her, and we just kind of just chit chatting. And one of her nieces in the Philippines, whom I've never met, was in school, had to do a paper about it was so some media class. She had to do a paper about someone that she knew or was related to in media or had been in media, and she just Googled names, and my name came up. So she listened to this interview that I did with the Show Pow show, and at the I was pitching it. I was promoting a whole totally different book, and the last question was like, "What are you working on?" And I've always been working on this book, so I just said, I'm working on this novel about my parents fleeing the Philippines during the Marcos martial law, and so she wrote the paper about me, and then sent the interview, the podcast, to my mom, and she listened to it. And I think it was my mom finally started seeing how serious I was and how important I thought it was. They started opening up a little bit more. So I don't ever see them reading it. They're just not book readers.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like they're coming around.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say that.
Yeah. Well, Jason, did you have a question for either Eileen or Nathan or both?
um, I actually read Eileen's book. I'm reading Nathan's right now, and I'm about halfway through. And uh, I'm just fascinated with, especially Nathan. Like, I just feel like this is a really interesting idea. Like, I would never have thought of, you know, did she? I mean, did she actually have a driver, or this is a completely made up character, right? Okay.
Yes.
So what made you give her a driver, you know, the specific male driver? Is this based off someone that you know?
Yes. There's like it's loosely based on a driver I know, and yeah, and so kind of like his mannerisms I kind of captured from
Okay,
them. I think it's easier that way for writers because if I'm just starting from a blank slate, a blank character, it's so difficult to give him life. But if you have somebody in mind, then it becomes easier because you just
yeah.
think, oh, how would this person do?
Yeah, that's how I write too, and it's funny because I use their real names in the first draft so I can keep them straight, and then I
Right.
change, then I change
I do that too.
them. Yeah, so
Nathan, Eileen, did you have questions for anybody?
Oh, I wanted to know, Nathan, because you returned to the Philippines. I mean, what are you working on nowadays? Yeah, the new novel, or and is that does that reflect your transition back?
Written for a very long time. I think I mentioned last week that I'm working. I have a family business, and so I'm really focusing on that. But I do have an idea in the back of my mind, which is I also happen to be of Chinese heritage,
Mm,
and so living in the Philippines with this kind of like identity. Although I consider myself to be pure Filipino because this is really where I grew up, where I was born. This is my home. Um, um, I think I haven't quite figured it out yet, but I want to say something more about that kind of like experience because my family, I mean, I think I'm not common, we're not common. I mean, we're not uncommon, sorry, in that my family has gone through so many waves of migration from my grandfather being from China, coming to the Philippines, and I migrated at some point to the US and then went back to the Philippines. I think it's quite common nowadays to do this. I mean, with all the travel and whatever being easier. Um, but in particular, I think there's something to be said about having lived in the US and having a Chinese ancestry and also being in the Philippines. I'm in some kind of crossroads because of what's happening in the world, like, you know, like the US versus China and then the Philippines
mhm.
being in between as well, because we also have our own problem with our boundary, as you all know about the splat lease. And I don't know. It's weird. I'm glad that my fear. I think my fear is that I won't have a home because I don't fit in anywhere. Like I'm not Chinese, so if I go to China, I don't belong there. I'm not American. I've lived in the US for so long. I share a lot of sensibilities, but I'm also not American. I'm Filipino, but I'm also not fully Filipino in the sense that people don't see me as a Filipino because superficially I don't look like Filipino. So I feel like I want to say something about that.